Hey guys, Savage Joy here with Real Progressives. Tonight I am joined by my most requested candidate. He is running for U.S. Senate in Maine, Mr. Zak Ringelstein. So thank you so much for joining us, Zak. I've been asked to have you on for quite some time now.
That means a lot, Joy. I'm so glad to be here.
It's always exciting when you people who aren't in your state actually know who you are. That's a good sign.
Yeah, it says a lot. It says that there's a ripple effect in this movement.
Absolutely. So through my research, I saw that you and actually your wife are public school teachers.
Yeah.
So how does one progress from being a school teacher to running for a U.S. Senate position?
That's the whole point of our campaign, is this belief that is ingrained in us from an early age that we are not meant to be in high-powered positions in Washington if we grow up working class, if we don't come from wealth, if we're not privy to certain information, or if we're not privy to certain parts of the class structure. And this is what needs to change. This is the problem, that at the end of the day, I would much rather someone who had worked as a firefighter last year in a seat in an office in Washington, or a teacher or a nurse, or somebody who has built my home and actually understand what it's like to labor, than the corporate lawyers and the billionaire class who currently runs our government. And so the whole point of this campaign is this idea that I grew up working class, the son of a social worker. I qualified for free and reduced lunches growing up. We were talking, Joy, beforehand, that my parents told me I couldn't get braces as a kid because it cost too much. And these are the kind of working class things that just are. What do you even, my wife and I graduated with $150,000 of debt. There was, this is just the way things are. And we both became public school teachers. But I saw the other side of things. I was invited to the White House to work on education policy. I have sat at boardroom tables and I've seen the other side of the coin. And it was shocking to me when I sat on the other side of the table and saw that truly the working class people aren't represented, that truly the people who are the stockholder class, the people who are in Washington, are not as impressive as the working class, and that we need to put working class people at the table, or else literally we are on the menu and we are getting eaten alive. And it's pretty disgusting that this is the case in this day and age.
Absolutely. I'd much rather eat the rich. We're coming up with recipes. I'm not sure. I'm not really a meat eater, so we'll have to kind of throw around ideas.
I'm not trying to talk about cannibalism here, but I am trying to. I mean, when I use that expression, obviously it's surprising, but it's also one of those things that truly people are dying, and I don't want to be light about it. They're like, these policies are killing us. America, the richest country in the world, is killing its citizens because it can't figure out how to get Medicare for all. And there are so many excuses, but there's no excuse. And we are, in my opinion, that in itself, in many ways, is violating violating a basic human right.
Absolutely. Do you think if Trump didn't win, do you think you'd still be running?
Honestly, no. I've been talking to a lot of folks in the political landscape recently about the fact that truly Trump isn't the problem. He's a symptom of a much bigger problem, which is called money in politics, that has been infesting our political system for decades, but has gotten really bad in the last few decades, especially post the Citizens United decision. And in many ways, Trump has illuminated what has helped to expose, in some ways, just how grotesque the system is. Unfortunately, I think we could have, all just kind of gotten along if it weren't for him. But, I was in my classroom teaching. I had a student who came up to me a few days after Trump was elected, and he said, "Hey, Mr. Ringelstein, my parents said I might be deported or we might have to leave. What do you think? Is that true?" Tears in his eyes. And it was the first time as a teacher where I really started to question my country, because I couldn't tell him it was going to be all right. I couldn't say, hey man, your school's got your back. We're good. You're going to be all right. Your family and the community are working together to protect you, because I really didn't know if I could say that with honesty. And I really feel like it really has helped us all to realize just how, what's really happening.
Absolutely. That's the one, I don't want to say good thing about Trump, but he did inadvertently wake a hell of a lot of people up. That's for sure. I mean, if Hillary won, I'd still be protesting the hell out of her, but in a different, she's still like a corporate money, but anyway, so, they're.
Go ahead. Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but.
Oh, no, that's okay.
But what I wanted to say is that, there are really key issues. For example, global warming, where with Hillary, we would have been on the pathway to making sure that we were curbing emissions to a degree that could be that could potentially ensure we hit some of the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. And now we're not. And so I don't want to pretend like there's really much of a silver lining to Trump, but I do agree with what you're saying, that he is exposing the true rot in our system.
I mean, she takes money from big oil and she supports fracking and stuff. So I'm not sure about that. I mean, I guess we'll never really know what would happen in the past, but yeah, I mean, I think we were screwed in both ways, just in different respects. Because you are right, it is absolutely symptoms.
Yeah,
without question.
Because I'm in a very interesting race right now. So I am in a ranked choice race, which means this is the first U.S. Senate race in U.S. history to be ranked choice, which means that people can rank the three people in my race. So there's an independent incumbent who caucuses with the Democrats, but he takes money from ExxonMobil and fast tracks gas pipelines. Like, he introduced a bill to fast track gas pipelines, bypassing community and tribal rights. He co-sponsored that bill to deregulate banks, votes for surveillance, votes with Trump about half the time, takes money from pharmaceuticals, doesn't support Medicare for all. And in any other situation, this would be viewed as a spoiler. I would be viewed as a spoiler, but it's really exciting because I get to run clean without corporate PAC, lobbyists, or fossil fuel money, support Medicare for all, a transition to 100% renewable energy. And in many ways, Angus is kind of like the Hillary in this race. I mean, I hate to say it, but he is. I mean, he's probably worse, to be fair. He voted for George W. Bush in 2000 and endorsed Susan Collins. And yeah, definitely worse. Nice. I think in many ways, that's a pretty good analogy.
I would say, yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people, when they were recommending you, said you were independent.
Oh, really?
And I got really hyped because I'm a very proud independent. And I was like, oh, yes, this is awesome. I love like Gail McLaughlin, I had a few times, but there's not a lot who I would actually ask on. And when I heard that, I was like, yes. And I looked everywhere, and everywhere I looked said Democrat. And I'm like, well, this is a good sign. If they think he's independent, that's good. Well, so that's a plus.
Well, I'm an insurgent in this race, and the establishment does not appreciate the fact that I'm calling them out. And
I bet. What does have you guys had my mind went blank because I was looking at the comments.
I'd be looking at these comments. Okay.
Why can't I think a debate? that
that's the one.
Very intense word there.
Our first debate with all three of us is on Monday morning, and then we will have a series of debates. I think we're going to have 4 in total over the next 2 weeks.
So late,
and very intentionally so.
I'm sure.
These are the only ones that Angus King agreed to do. And he intentionally did this because in Maine, we have early voting where you can, for example, I voted today. And a lot of, I'm not going to say most, but a lot of folks do. It's an absentee ballot, but you do it right in town hall, give it back, or you can do an absentee situation. And it's really bad because he very intentionally made sure these debates would be late in the process in order so that he could shore up a lot of these early votes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Dude, what is the sense of ranked choice voting in Maine? Do you think people are hype about it, or are they concerned?
It's a little bit of both. Listen, we, the people, made this happen. So the history of ranked choice voting is that Governor LePage, do you know who Governor LePage is?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He calls himself Trump before Trump, and that's very accurate. Okay. He vetoed Medicaid expansion 5 times, and then it went to a referendum and it passed. And he is now failing to implement it, which means that 70 to 80,000 Mainers are going without health insurance that are legally supposed to have it. So anyway, he is horrendous. And this governor of ours has won twice with significantly below 50% of the vote. And in a ranked choice scenario, he would have lost both times. And so the people of Maine, who are good at experiments, we have a great clean election system. We've legalized marijuana, one of the first to do gay marriage. We the people of Maine said, we're going to do this ranked choice voting thing. And we voted on a referendum to pass it in 2016. One of the interesting things is that the legislature, as they do with a lot of our referendums, they botched it basically and said that they're not going to implement it. Then the people did something called a people's veto this winter, literally in the cold of Maine, collected tens of thousands of signatures.
Wow.
And vetoed, literally, I helped with this, helped collect signatures. We vetoed the legislature's decision. But what that meant is that it's very confusing, but there is some issues with some wording in the state constitution. So the governor's race, which is very contentious, and one of the reasons why it got passed in the first place, is not ranked choice, but the federal elections are ranked choice. And so that's a little confusing to the voters.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I'm very interested to see any kind of spreadsheets or documentation after it happens, so we can, either improve or promote or what have you, because there's certainly some advantageous things towards going that way. Absolutely. I know Green Party is very huge on ranked choice.
Yes.
And I mean, it makes so much more sense. I don't know.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about it. And the reason it's really powerful is that it means that people can vote their hopes. So in this election, in any other race, I would be perceived as a spoiler because people would think Angus is kind of a Democrat. He caucuses with the Democrats. There's no reason to have a Democrat in this race. What's going to happen is you're going to help put a Republican in the seat. You know the narrative. It's the lesser of two evils narrative. There is no lesser of two evils. You can vote your hopes in this election. And what I'm telling people is rank me first, rank Angus second, and no matter what happens, you're going to get them one or the other. Because if, for example, if I win, that's great. If I don't win by chance, what happens is that Angus would then get your vote. Does that make sense? So
sure. Absolutely
knocked off, and he would then get your vote. So it's this really amazing moment for our state, and I think to show off to the country that this can be done across the board and can truly help you vote your hopes in. And I think it means that actually the people will start winning more and more power.
Absolutely. One of my biggest passions is vote shaming. And I feel like if we had, that that method of voting, I feel like vote shaming would just kind of start depleting, because if they
Yes.
say, did you vote for so and so? Well, yeah, I did. I mean, maybe 10th, but I did.
No, that's it. No, exactly. And people have been trying to say that to me. Oh, wait, you're a spoiler. And I can say, no, I'm not a spoiler. I went up to, this is a really fun story. So I went up to, I knock on doors. Today I spent the day knocking on doors. People are always surprised. They're always like, U.S. Senate candidate at my door. And I'm like, yeah, this is the people's campaign. Anyway, so I'm on an island in Maine, okay? And I'm knocking on a door. And this guy is outside eating lunch. And he's like, oh, hey, Zach, I know about your race. He goes, and I'm knocking on this door, and I see that he has an Angus King sign, actually one of the first ones that I'd seen out there. And I think to myself, uh-oh, how's this going to go? And then surprisingly, he says, Zach, I support you 100%. I'm a real progressive. But the problem is, man, you're going to spoil a vote. And I said, no, it's not true. We have ranked choice voting. And he's like, oh, well, then I'm ranking you first, Angus second. And I was like, can I put my sign in your lawn? And he's like, yeah, put it right next to Angus's. So literally in this guy's lawn, he's able to support both of us. And I think that's really powerful.
It is. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, do you have paper ballots, or do you use machines?
Yes, we have. Well, so it's paper ballots, but they get processed through machines.
I see. Do you get receipts?
It depends on the municipality, I believe. What was it?
Do you get receipts?
I did not get a receipt today when I voted. I don't believe I've ever received a receipt. No.
Did you vote first for yourself?
Picture of me voting today. Everyone can go like it and share it. My wife Leah and son Jack, we're all at the voting booth together.
Aww.
Yeah.
What a cutie. Oh my gosh. Your kids are so cute.
I'm not gonna lie, I think my kids are cute too. I love these little guys. The reason we're doing it.
What's that?
I said they're the reason we're doing this. Like,
oh, totally.
Huge.
Absolutely.
Huge thing, huge sacrifice, but it just, Leah and I talk about the fact that when they're in their 20s and the coral reefs are gone and we have, we're ravaged by fires and floods and droughts and war because we didn't step up, that we're not letting that happen.
Exactly. You touched on a little bit of one of your students who was scared he would, get deported. You actually, the first time I heard of you, which was probably a lot of people, their first time, was when you got arrested back in June. And to me, that scores a lot of points as an activist. I'm like, yes. So do you want to explain to everyone why you were arrested?
Sure. So I had never been arrested until this year, and I've actually been arrested twice. The first time that I got arrested this year was part of the Poor People's Campaign. I joined up with ministers and rabbis and activists, mostly people of faith, who believe that the war economy is immoral and that we need to, as I'm sure most people who are watching this show believe, we need to put people ahead of power and big money and war. And this was actually Martin Luther King's campaign that he left behind when he was assassinated and has been picked up. Anyway, we were on Governor LePage's lawn singing literally like If I Had a Hammer and other peaceful protest songs when we got arrested. We have a court date literally the day after the election on November 7th for that one. But anyway, so the second time that I got arrested this year was the one that most people are aware of, and it was at the height of when Trump is detaining children, and it was the height of people's awareness of what he was doing to children at the border, in his internment camps. I went down there. I felt like I was actually in the middle of a very highly promoted 16 county tour. There were 16 counties in Maine, and I was camping in every county in the state. It was really fun and got a lot of energy behind the campaign. And I just said to my staff, guys, I know this is not the easiest thing because we've promoted this, everything's set up minute by minute, but I'm going down there. I'm not running away from the fire, not tweeting about it. I'm going. And I packed a truck full of toys, pillows, blankets, and other supplies, drove up to the detention center and refused to move unless they let me deliver the toys and told me when the children would be released. And they were just not interested. The moment that the media arrived, they arrested me, and it was well documented. And I ended up being in jail for about a day. I was shackled and brought to county prison, and the whole experience was pretty horrifying. Also, from the lens of what we are doing in our prison system, which is I was very concerned about how many correctional officers there were, and I looked it up later, and our student-to-teacher ratio is 16-1, and our inmate to correctional officer ratio is 4-1. So kind of speaks to the priorities in our society and the immoral budget that we have. And you ask, oh, how do we fund public schools? Well, maybe we could take from our jail budget and we could invest in our public schools so as to save people from the criminal justice system later on.
And the interesting thing is, if we got rid of for-profit prison, I mean, we would be so much better in so many ways, especially locking up Black and brown people for marijuana. That would pretty much not happen comparatively. Did you ever get to give them the stuff you brought, or did you have to bring it back home?
So they towed my truck, and most of the supplies were still there on the back of the truck, and what we did was we picked up the truck the next morning on basically no sleep, and that was a very emotional day the next day. Honestly, it was very traumatizing. I left my 2 kids back here in Maine and went down there and was in jail and had no idea what was going on. And when I got let out, I really wanted to figure out something I could do positively, and so we ended up going to the Catholic Charities. And it just so happened that day, I want to say maybe a couple hundred people were released from detention centers, and they were all folks who had tried to immigrate into this country, and it was really moving because I just got to play the role that I'm used to playing, which is which was that I just served food. So I got to serve food and water, and I delivered all the supplies that we had on the back of the truck to that facility. Unfortunately, they didn't reach the kids who were still detained. These folks were actually let free. But it was a really moving experience to have face-to-face with the people who had been detained and who were hurting from these policies, and to welcome people to this country. I just kept saying bienvenidos. I don't speak much Spanish, but I had the opportunity to say welcome. We're good. Americans can be good. Americans are good. We are welcoming people. And I think that was part of our message, was that there is an America that is good. There is a welcoming spirit here. And at the end of that experience, I just burst into tears, to be honest. It was just a lot. But to see the faces of the people and to shake their hands and hug them and serve them food was the most important part of that experience for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really powerful. The biggest thing, on platforms that people are, very passionate about, it seems, is Medicare for all. So why is that on your platform?
Why is Medicare for all on my platform?
Yeah, why are you passionate about that?
Because healthcare is a human right, and we are killing our neighbors because we don't provide basic access to healthcare, and I believe it's criminal. We pay the most per capita of any country in the world on healthcare, and yet have the worst results of any developed economy. Here in Maine, we have a huge issue with access to healthcare because it's a very rural state. And I actually wrote a New York Times piece this year about how 82 hospitals have closed since 2010, and countless departments have closed. And we basically are incentivizing sickness in our for-profit hospitals. And we have a huge problem where people are paying, second mortgages or living in fear, not going to the doctor because we don't provide access. And even when we do, like I buy insurance through the marketplace, and it costs a fortune. When Leah, my wife, was pregnant this past year, she got an ultrasound, and we had to pay for the whole thing. It was really expensive. And you just realize that even when you have health insurance, it's not really covering you. And so this is a ridiculous system. It's completely irrational. We have to fix it. There are examples around the world of places that are doing it much better than we're doing. 70% of Americans support Medicare for all. Over 50% of Republicans, surprisingly, support Medicare for all. And we need it. There's just no other question. And the other thing is, to those who are skeptics or say it's going to cost too much, first and foremost, listen to this logic. If we're paying 17% of our GDP and we don't have Medicare for all, we have this horrible Frankenstein of a system. And the next country after us, who pays the second most, pays 13%. Then the minute we switch, we're paying less. Okay? So this argument is ridiculous. Secondly, obviously, we're going to have better long-term outcomes. People are going to get healthcare when they need it, and therefore we're going to prevent people from getting sick. And then thirdly, employers are assuming so much of the cost. And so what's crazy is that this would actually be a huge stimulus to the economy. Companies should be begging for Medicare for all, because they would stop having to pay this cost, which means that they could raise wages, they could hire new workers, they could buy new equipment. Hopefully they won't give it to their stockholders as they do with their tax cuts. But the point is that it would be a huge stimulus to the economy and to the private sector as well. So those are some of the reasons, and clearly not all, but it's necessary. We must demand it.
Absolutely. I never thought I'd find myself in the position of needing it personally, but my viewers know the past month I've been having surgeries and then, all this shit. And it's like, I'm young, I'm 39, but it's like, you don't know when stuff is going to happen and you're going to end up in an emergency room. And I mean, it's crazy. It's terrifying. Yeah. With Medicare for all, would you also, or single payer or anything like that, would you also support putting a cap on prescription drugs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was reading the other day that the median American pays about $1,500 per year on prescription drugs. The second country in the world pays less than half of that, okay? So we are paying way too much. And so we need to make sure that we are setting the prices, and we can do this. But unfortunately, people like Angus King and the majority of Republicans and Democrats take money from pharmaceutical companies and aren't about to change this policy. And that's one of the things that we have to do.
Absolutely. That's the only way we're going to get any kind of Medicare for all, for sure. On your platform, you also have Green New Deal, which is very, very important to us here at Real Progressives. Now, Maine is a very green state, which is, I've never been, but I dream to be. What are some of the things that you would love to see in Maine come to fruition?
Sure. So for all of you who are out there, Green New Deal is the idea that it's FDR's New Deal. It's all of us unifying around one simple goal, which is to save our planet. And when we do that, what we get to do is we not only save our planet, but when we invest in that transition to 100% renewable energy by 2035, we also are going to build high-wage jobs. And Maine is a place that is really well suited for this because we have a really sunlight hits America for the first time in Maine, right? We have really great potential for solar. We also have tidal. We also have the opportunity to do offshore wind. And so there are these great opportunities. Maine has built technologies that we can then go ahead and use here again to build this kind of thing out in our second congressional district, which is actually in a depression that is longer and deeper than the Great Depression. And so it's just a win-win. And the only, again, reason that we're not doing this, we're not making these huge steps forward, is because big oil has bought our US Senate. Angus King has taken money from ExxonMobil. And unfortunately, there's just this idea that incrementalism can work. Incrementalism can't work with global warming, okay? Like if you want to ever see a coral reef after the next decade, you need to stop this nonsense. Like, for example, today, there's something published about how Angus King wants natural gas. Natural gas. Okay, first of all, I want to stop calling it natural gas, all right? It's gas, all right? And it's almost as bad as oil. It's not a good transition. We need to take bold steps, aggressive steps forward if we want to save our planet for our kids.
Absolutely. And well, along that line, do you support a federal job guarantee?
I do. I call it in my plan Jobs for All. I find that to be just a little bit more friendly to those who don't like the words federal or guarantee.
Yeah.
As progressives, we can do a little bit of a better job at branding ourselves, actually. That's one of my things. But what I was going to say is that, Jobs for All, the idea being that we could have, instead of an unemployment office, we could have an employment office. Imagine that. Why would we encourage unemployment when we could encourage employment, when we could encourage purpose, when we could give people jobs in our community, in community centers, building roads and high-speed broadband in areas that need it. We need infrastructure. We need better education system. We need a better healthcare system. What better way than to give people who want good jobs? The other thing about Jobs for All that I like to talk about is the fact that unions have been decimated in the last decades. And the reality is that unions are great for the individual worker, but they're also really good for wages. And one of the reasons, probably the main reason that wages are so bad and people are paying, are working 2 or 3 jobs, barely making ends meet, is because there's no unions who are setting a standard for wages. So in the past, you'd have all these union jobs, and if they're paying a certain amount, let's just say $20 an hour, then the rest of the private sector then has to compete with that amount. And we don't have that anymore. And so we need something like Jobs for All, especially during a time when unions are crumbling, because it sets a standard of wages so that the rest of the private sector has to compete, especially in a time when most of the country has such a low minimum wage.
Absolutely. Great point. You have racial justice on your platform. What does that mean to you as a white man? Like, how do you interpret that? What would you like to see happen?
Well, the first thing we all have to do if we're in politics is check our privilege. And that's something that I have to do every day. It's something I had to do every single day as a teacher, working in inner city communities and realizing that, I am very privileged. And I believe that what it means that we need to level the playing field for all Americans. And it means the end of for-profit prisons. It means decriminalizing drug use and ending the war on drugs. It means, really looking at our criminal justice system and recognizing that there are more Black men who are in prison today than were enslaved in the 1850s, and that speaks to a culture that is, quite frankly, racist. and we need to demilitarize our police, and we need to really look at what it's going to take. I mean, I think about public education, for example. If you look at places that are schools that are quote unquote failing, or areas where kids are not doing as well academically, most of the time these are in areas where that are low income, which unfortunately are disproportionately areas where there are more people of color. And we need to name it, and we need to change it. And in public education, we need to stop standardized testing these children and saying that they're failing. We need to actually invest in great teachers, retaining teachers in these communities, and in building out a public education system where children who are growing up low income are receiving the same kind of public education that someone in a wealthier community in America, a wealthier and oftentimes whiter community, would see. And so, same thing with basic access to healthcare across the board. So this is a multi-pronged, very systemic, and unfortunately, with the Trump administration, only getting worse.
Yes, definitely. Well, it looks like people are fighting over you on which state they want you to come to. So after you win in Maine, you may have to move to another state and run, because you're being fought over right now.
Right. I don't think I'm leaving anytime soon. Sorry, guys, but
you guys all have to go there. Sorry. I'd love to make a hippie commune. It's probably going to be in Burlington, so I can have President Bernie, but it could be a second.
There are lots of areas of Maine that are ripe for hippie communes, so let's think about it.
Let's see. That's what I was going to address. You have Opioid Crisis on your platform. Is that something very prevalent in your state?
Yes. It's a very deep and very sad crisis. It's an epidemic. And the state of Maine, is a small state of 1.3 million people. And we treasure each life, and we have small communities here. And we've seen in the last couple of decades this opioid crisis get worse and worse and worse. There is more than one Mainer a day dying from opioids. And we need to, first of all, catch the root problems of this. Some of that is economics, and the fact that we don't have good paying jobs here, and we have way too high of housing prices. On top of that, we need to figure out how to make sure kids aren't growing up with trauma, and that we have trauma-informed instruction in schools. And then we need to actually, when somebody has an addiction or is using opioids, we need to actually treat it, and we need to stop criminalizing it. And unfortunately, we do a lot of criminalizing and blaming, and it's incredibly stigmatized. We need to destigmatize, and we need to take some really active steps. One good one is safe injection sites. Another good one is to make sure that there are homes where people can recover. We also need access to life-saving drugs. And unfortunately, our governor here in the state is trying to prevent people from accessing those kinds of drugs like Narcan. This is a huge community issue, and we need to treat it like the crisis that it is.
Have you seen, with marijuana being legalized, have you seen a decrease in use?
That's a good question. I think I know for a fact that a lot of people are, part of their treatment is marijuana. I do not know. I believe that last year, 2017, was the most amount of deaths that we've had. So I don't believe there is any decrease, unfortunately.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, so when I was reading your platform, and of course I went right to schooling because you're a teacher, it actually, there was a blurb about taking on Betsy DeVoe about something. Can you kind of clarify what that is?
Yeah, so I was a teacher here in Maine when Betsy DeVos was confirmed. First of all, for all of you who are upset with Susan Collins, I think upset is probably an understatement of a word. But for those of you who are upset with Susan Collins, she took a lot of credit for voting against Betsy DeVos. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah,
but she
yeah.
voted to get her out of committee, and so it is her fault. Like, she was the deciding vote in committee. Anyway, this is a side note. But I was a teacher. I was part of a group that a friend of mine, a principal friend, and I started called Power to Public. The idea being that we need to strengthen our public schools, not privatize our public schools, which is this quote unquote reform movement, which is charterizing and creating these for-profit charter schools, et cetera. And what we did is we led a resistance effort with a number of teacher groups and the teachers unions nationally, and held a protest in Washington, D.C. And in many ways, I believe that Medicare for all and a great public education system are the cornerstones of the American dream. And Betsy DeVos is truly an enemy to the American dream. And so we need to do everything we can to stop this administration and stop money in politics, especially with regards to healthcare and education. And one quick anecdote is I got invited to the White House a few years ago during the Obama administration, and I was in a room with Secretary of Education at the time, Arnie Duncan, and his staff, and some other folks who had been invited to the meeting. And it turned out that I was the only person in that room talking about pre-K education who had ever worked in a public school. So it kind of paints the picture pretty clearly. Right.
Wow. I can't say I'm surprised, but that really sucks. Like, it really sucks for sure. So as far as when you go canvassing and or do phone banking, do you get people, because I know I get them here and we see it online, do you get people who say, what the hell is the point in voting? They steal our votes. They don't count them. What does it matter? When you get people like that, how do you respond? How do you encourage them and tell them that their vote counts when quite often, and not necessarily in Maine, but quite often we're shown that it doesn't?
So I'm looking at the comments here. I don't believe I said anything about deaths from marijuana.
No, you didn't. I wanted to clarify that, you guys. I don't know if the feed cut out or anything, but I would never have anyone on my show who would say something like that. He definitely did not say that.
Somebody wrote, nobody's ever died from consuming cannabis, and that is a fact. So, to answer the question, because that is just want to segue into your question now. So I think there are a lot of people. We're watching voter suppression across the country. For example, with our referendum process, if you look at if you just look at almost all of the referendums that have passed in the state of Maine, they've been botched by the legislature, and there's this sense here that your vote doesn't count. And I honestly don't blame people for a second for saying that. But I have to say, guys, this is, while we still have a vote, this is all we have. And if you can vote, then you have to leverage what small power you have and bring your friends out, because this is going to make or break our society, our country, whether or not we have a democracy for our children.
Absolutely. If there's something you want to leave our viewers with, so that maybe they check out your website or recommend you to people in Maine, what do you want to leave them with to take away?
Yeah, I had one of the honors of my life. I got to meet with Congressman John Lewis, who is a civil rights leader and was on the Freedom Ride, spoke at the March in Washington with Martin Luther King, and I got to meet with him. And one of the things that he said to me was, Zach, the one thing you need to project is hope. And we have this opportunity as progressives, as the people who, honestly, I don't think this is a partisan thing. I think it's just a human thing. We're just the ones who are actually speaking the truth. We're not influenced by corporate greed. We're being honest about what the people want. Most of our policies are the most popular policies. And so we need to stay united. And we need to stay hopeful. We need to band together during this time. And we need to remember that even though this journey is really dark and hard, that it's worth it. And someone said the other day, it's not always about the goal, it's about the movement. And we are moving things right now. We're moving something forward that needs to be moved. And I just wanted to say that there is a glimmer of hope, and it's this movement. And the other thing I want to say is that we could use every ounce of support. Listen, I know that we have viewers from across the country. If you could share our page, like our page, if you can make a donation or send out a link to all your Facebook or Twitter supporters about making a donation to our campaign. We are fighting the establishment right now, and they have a lot of money, and they are trying to obviously do what they do, which is elect incumbents who are bought. And so whatever you can do to support us, we're actually going to have our first TV ads starting on Saturday, and we need support getting more TV ads up so that we can really get to folks in Maine who don't have as much access to the internet. For example, we have a very large older population that tends to watch cable TV. So we need to really get our name out there. The biggest problem with our race is name recognition, and we have less than 3 weeks to make this happen. So every single bit of support, every single small donation, every single share, every single thing really matters. So and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. One of my teammates is going to put the link up. What is the website?
Yeah, the website is ringelsteinformaine.com. And you can also go to my Facebook, and we have a pretty active Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Zach. You're great, and I really wish you the best of luck.
You're great, and I'm really excited to be on this podcast. And let's do it again. All right.
Awesome. And thank you guys for watching. I'm hyped because Jovanka Beckles is coming back from California. She's a total badass. And I still have Sarah Imarato coming back with Summer Lee, who are with me in Pennsylvania. The Democratic Socialists who whoop the asses of establishment brothers. So they'll be coming up next week as well. So thank you guys again for watching, and thank you so much, Zach. Best of luck.
See you, everyone. Thank you.
Take care. Oh, Elizabeth, if you can still hear me, what happened was I asked if marijuana being legalized has helped with the opioid addiction. And he said he doesn't know if it helped with the deaths. So that's what that was a reference to. Thanks, guys.